Financial freedom is in your hands. With CMC Markets' revolutionary new iPad app, you can trade CFDs wherever you are with the leverage you choose. Download now and trade your way. At CMC Markets, your thought counts.
I've been talking to Meg McDonald, the CEO of Low Carbon Australia, which is the government body that was set up last year to invest alongside Australian companies in emissions reducing initiatives. Meg McDonald, welcome to CEO Hub. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Alan. Great to be here.
Now, CEO Hub is about the business of being a CEO, and you're in a unique position, a company that's owned by the government but separate from the government. So tell us a bit about what that's like and what are the challenges in terms of sitting between the private sector and the government sector.
It's a challenge that was quite deliberately a choice for me, having worked a long time in the public sector and also in the private sector, and seeing some of the lack of understanding between in the business world about how government works, and likewise the lack of understanding in some of the official sources about how business works.
Quite often the aims and the aspirations are quite different, aren't they?
Exactly, and here we have a challenge where we've been a company set up by the federal government with $100 million to invest, co-invest with business in energy efficiency to achieve carbon savings. So we're actually set up to achieve a public good, that is an environmental good, but to make that a business, a sustainable business over time.
So do you look for an ROI when you invest your money? You're
yes.
looking for a return on the investment.
Exactly, and because the objective is that we've been set up with this money to become a revolving fund, and we're co-investing with business with them in projects that deliver carbon savings and energy savings, but are also, they're doing so not for corporate social responsibility reasons, but to actually achieve a return within their own business. So we're actually like an investment fund, and but for correcting a market failure and to achieve a social good, that is the carbon savings. And it's a fascinating example of the government really being able to take an innovative approach and work with businesses who want to similarly take an innovative approach. And we've had a fantastic response from business as well.
So tell us a bit about the differences between being a CEO in the public sector and the private sector. You've been in both, in the private sector with Alcoa,
yes,
with the government in the, I guess, in the Foreign Service, among other things. How different is it being a CEO and in particular the task of managing upwards?
It's interesting because you're actually accountable to your shareholders, and we're taking an approach here where we have a shareholder, that is the Minister for Climate Change and Energy Efficiency, and we're accountable to the whole Australian community. So it does actually change some of the ways in which you think about what would be your strategy for approaching an investment portfolio like the one that we've set out to do.
So how do you have to treat your shareholder in that situation? You've got your board, which you obviously deal with month by month and week by week.
Day by day.
Day by day. But the shareholder, obviously, you have to look after as well.
Exactly, and so really being able to clearly articulate what our objectives are, set out a very clear business plan that the shareholder and the public actually understand, and be much more transparent about the way in which you're going to go about your business is one of the big changes, and from the public sector to the private sector. So we've really had to set out quite clearly a strategy which designed to actually access a wide proportion of the market. If you were just doing a startup in an investment fund in the area that we're in, you go down a much narrower path than we're actually doing, because we're trying to demonstrate to the public and to the business sector how this sort of model can work. And that's the accountability that we have as a publicly owned.
But is there a difference between the shareholder and the public? I mean, the shareholder's one person. Do you have to manage him, in this case Greg Combet, differently to the way you'd sort of talk to the public in general?
No, because you would treat Greg Combet under normal governance rules as the member and have an annual general meeting with him. And clearly our objectives are set out in our constitution for the public good. And so being very, very clear on the respective roles of each of the various parties. What is the respective role of us as an executive? What is the respective role of the board? And what's the respective role of the government? The member, and also all of the various officials that we have to deal with, because we're there to fulfil a public good. The government has a particular set of policies and objectives, and so we are working with them to try to achieve some of those, but maintaining a role which is not policy, which is actually just implementing a particular program.
But you're an investment company with a
very specific purpose, and so we have to be very, very clear in our own minds exactly where our borders are between the governance responsibilities and the broader policy responsibilities.
Well, tell me in general, what do you think is the key to being a good leader in business?
Well, that's one thing that is irrespective of,
right.
of the ownership, which is really setting a very, very clear direction and having a very clear idea of what the objectives of the business are, and being able to see both short-term and long-term, and being able to articulate those to the executive, to the staff, to the board, get the board very, very clearly on side and very, very much part of the team.
Do you find that you have to articulate it over and over again?
Exactly, yeah. It's politics in that sense, that you're really selling an idea and being able to, particularly when it's a new idea on the scene. So I spend a lot of my time actually out talking to a lot of business groups and getting them on side as well, because we are really looking at changing the marketplace here, and that's a very much broader objective than most businesses our size would be challenged.
Some of the research I've seen about schemes like yours, grants or investment schemes, indicates that it's quite difficult to actually give the money away or to get the money out there, and that in fact, looking at the history of these sort of schemes, only a small proportion of the money has actually been invested. Is that your experience as well, that you're having trouble getting the money out?
We were very pleasantly surprised when we went out to the marketplace last year with a request for proposals. We got proposals back which would have oversubscribed us by more than 3 times. But more importantly,
yes, but the question is, how good are they?
More importantly, they were representing $1.5 billion worth of investment from the private sector alongside investment of our $100 million. So that really gives you an idea that there is an appetite to do this in a tailored way, rather than actually having a grant scheme which usually has a set of uniform requirements, and giving the money away is actually much easier than the sort of co-investment that we're doing. But it also allows us to work with individual companies to measure the results that we're getting. And we've now committed 1/3 of our funding within the first year. We're setting up a bunch of financial products, some loans, some new energy efficiency leasing products, which are quite new on the marketplace. So my view is a well thought through strategy, and one which is responding to particular business needs rather than setting out a blanket government program, is likely to be more successful, and more successful in delivering the results. And so far, so good. We're being able to, but we've pursued that, and that's one of the other things that I think is really important about what we're doing, is being flexible enough to do individual products with under individual programs with groups of companies, but also being very clear with why we're working with those companies, and making sure that there's good alignment. If there's not good alignment, you're not going to actually have the results. And I think that's where some of the sorts of schemes that we have been looking at in this area that have been less successful, it's because the money's been there, but the design and the delivery hasn't actually always been there. And we're in the unique position, by being a private sector company, of being able to be more flexible about that.
You always invest alongside private sector investors.
And we've decided to choose companies that we know have got the delivery capacity, and they actually have the market drive and therefore their capacity is likely to make sure that the product's delivered well, rather than having to invent a whole delivery scheme ourselves.
Just finally, you were involved with the Australian team at Kyoto in 1997.
I was, yeah.
And 191 states have now signed or ratified Kyoto, but there's only a year to go until it's finished. How do you think the world now is sitting after Copenhagen and then Cancun last year?
It's an interesting question. And the international arena is one that I've been kind of out of for quite a long time now. But what I'm seeing is where I thought actually we should have been back in the days when we were arguing for very differentiated approaches for different countries, because in the end it's domestic policy that will drive countries to do the sort of mitigation and the climate policies that best suit them. And that's where the world is moving to, a very multi-strand approach with countries choosing a tailor-made approach.
And with the big transfer of money too from the rich countries to the poor countries, they've set up this $100 billion fund now.
Exactly, and that was always going to be part of that, and an opportunity for businesses to participate in those growing economies. And if you look at the opportunities that there are for companies to be investing in places like Brazil, for instance, in projects which actually do achieve genuine emission reductions, that can only be actually a positive for where we should be going, rather than looking for uniform approaches which take a long time to negotiate and in the end maybe not be as effective as some of the domestically driven approaches. And that's.
But are you more pessimistic now than when you walked out of Kyoto in 1997? Presumably everyone sort of clapping themselves on the back for having come to that agreement?
Oh, I don't think people really clapped themselves on the back in Kyoto. I think everybody really understood that that was a target. It wasn't actually a set of domestic measures to achieve it. And now we're doing it the other way round. Now people are bringing their domestic measures in and looking to see what that can achieve, and then negotiating on that as a basis. There's some very good international models, particularly in the trade field, that actually are very much analogous to where we are in the climate field now. And so I'm much more optimistic about where that's going internationally. You
mean the GATT round and all that stuff, right?
Which is where countries actually have very detailed schedules of what they're actually going to be delivering. People don't have uniform tariff schedules, and that's worked very, very well for a long period of time. Again, a big multilateral negotiation that's taking time for the next big breakthrough, but I think the climate world is going to move into that sort of level of complexity as well. And if countries are actually doing it, that's really the most important thing, rather than what particular target you do or don't actually achieve. And setting up emissions trading schemes and other market mechanisms is, I think, the most important thing for driving that globally. And it'll take time, but you have to have a long view, a much longer view in the multilateral world than you do even in business.
Well, thanks very much for joining us, Meg. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Alan.